All right, welcome back in. First half of the show on Buccaneers Total Access, brought to you by Advent Health. We had head coach Todd Bowles. Now I am so excited to be joined by Vice President of Player Personnel, Mike Biehl. Mike, thank you so much for joining us.
You bet. Thanks, Casey.
I'm imagining, 2 or 3 hours of sleep, if that?
Yeah, that's probably about right.
You just watched the film, which I'm sure, again, great mood coming into the show. So you drew the short straw on it being a late night and a loss. So I really appreciate you coming in to chat with us. And I just figured we'd kind of start with just takeaways from the game overall, especially now that you've seen the film again.
Yeah, I mean, it was one of those games where we knew going into it was going to be a tough opponent and it was going to be a physical game, and that's what it was. And we didn't have our best last night, but it's one game, so we just got to put that one behind us and move on to New Orleans.
I was thinking about all the injuries this season. It's been such a huge storyline for the Bucs and then even the league overall. It just feels like so many big name guys, quantity of guys going down. How do injuries affect the scouting department in particular? That we always talk about maybe the training staff and all of that, but for you guys, whether it's one injury, a bunch of injuries, how does that affect what you guys are doing the rest of that week?
Yeah, I mean, really when you have a number of injuries at a certain position, that's when it really gets tough. So then we have to step up and try to have workouts and bring guys in to just fill out the roster. First of all, it's hard to find really good players this time of year that are going to help you, but you at least have to be able to put people on practice squad and things like that to where you can actually have a practice. So that's the big thing, is when we have lots of injuries, it's just we got to put everything in motion as far as having workouts, bringing guys in, making roster moves, things like that. And that gets tricky sometimes, especially, like I said, if you have them at a bunch of injuries at one position.
I know that Tyke is a guy who has had some really great games recently. We saw another great one in last night's game, and leading the team in tackles, getting multiple tackles for loss in multiple games, getting sacks. What are the things that it's been like for you guys as scouts? Did you realize the level he could play at, and then especially being able to do it now at different positions, to see what he's done, as a rookie coming in at a difficult position in this defense, and then now moving so seamlessly to safety and still putting up these kind of numbers?
Yeah, I think we all thought ultimately he was going to be a safety. So I think he's at his natural position now. He did a heck of a job last year when he filled in a nickel, to your point, in Todd Bowles' defense. That's one of the hardest positions to play. So I just think that he's at his natural position now. He's playing fast. He's playing physical. He's been one of our most consistent defenders the whole season, and we're excited to see what he's going to do going forward. But I really love the physicality that he brings to our defense, and he kind of sets the tone out there.
Yeah, and so there's the physicality, and then, of course, like we said, the versatility. And I feel like I've heard a lot of you guys on your staff talk about the importance of versatility as you evaluate a player. I'm trying to imagine, if all things are equal, a player who is just maybe unbelievable at one thing versus a player who's almost as good but maybe at multiple things. Is that going to win out in y'all's mind in the department? Because we've seen, especially in that secondary, guys like Tyke, guys like Izzy, and even Jacob Parrish already, of how important it is to you guys that they can be able to do multiple things.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately we just like good football players. I mean, that's the bottom line. And usually if they're smart, they're able to move around and do different things. I think when you get somebody who's just like the old school strong safety, for example, that can just play in the box and he can't play deep and he doesn't have the range, like those guys are kind of a dying breed. There's not a lot of those in the league anymore. So you have to be able to come down in the box. You have to be able to play deep from depth. You have to be able to step out at nickel if we need it. We're definitely looking for versatility. Christian Izzy is another one of those guys. Parrish, you said, those guys can do it all. And then, of course, Antoine, he's been the staple back there and played about every position possible. So that's definitely something as a scouting department we're taking into account and we're looking for.
You being a part of Jason Light's staff, you guys have been here through several different coaches. How much does a coach's scheme on both sides of the ball, you get a different coordinator or a different head coach, how much does that affect the scouting that you do? Because you'll hear things like, oh, Bowles loves a long corner, a long, fast corner, things like that. Or is it just for you guys hey, we're drafting good players, it doesn't matter, and then we'll figure it out? How much can the staff changing affect what you guys do going into the next year?
Yeah, every time we've had a coaching change, we always have meetings with the coordinators, the head coach, whoever it is, to figure out what they look for at every position. So that does factor in. But I think as a scouting staff and really as a team, we've done a very good job of not putting parameters on certain players. I know there's certain teams that they have to have 6-foot corners, otherwise they're going to take them off the board. We don't do that, because I think you eliminate a lot of good football players when you do that. So To your point, I think we try to take really good football players and the best players that are available. But I do think that the scheme and what the coaches are looking for does factor into it a little bit.
We're talking to Vice President of Player Personnel Mike Biehl. So looking at the depth of that being a huge part of what you guys do is not just finding your stars, but really making sure that knowing injuries will happen at some point, the depth. And I was thinking about wide receiver of unfortunately just seeing how many injuries you guys have dealt with this season, but to see people like Tez, like Shep, like Cam Johnson stepping into these roles, how proud are you of the depth at that position in particular? And why does it feel like that is a position you guys have been pretty good at finding some more of these unsung potential heroes?
Yeah, I think I'm super proud of our staff because you're talking about not high picks in a lot of these guys. With Tez being picked where he was in the 7th round, Cam was a free agent. Like these things are what a scouting staff you get excited about, right? Because this is what we spend all of our time doing. Our area scouts are out there pounding the pavement and trying to find guys like this to come in that they see something in these players that think that they can eventually contribute to our team. And then when you see it come to fruition, it's exciting as a scouting staff. But I just think that receiver, and then we've had a rash of injuries at corner too, and I think our depth at both of those positions has really had to step up this year, and I think those guys have. And it's just those positions are such a hard position to play, just with the sheer volume of running and hitting and everything that they have to do. You're going to have injuries throughout the season, and we've probably had a little bit more this year than we would like, but I think the guys have really stepped up and done a nice job.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit more about Emecka in particular. Take us through the draft process with him, of when he came on y'all's radar and when you started realizing that no matter what you might have thought about position of need, which turned out this ended up being one, but at the time it didn't seem like as big of a priority maybe. At what point did you guys just know, if he's there, this is our guy, like who cares about position almost at this point? Well,
when he came on the radar, it was probably his sophomore year, like when he was just making plays at Ohio State, in a crowded receiver room, but this Emecka Egbuka guy just kept stepping up and catching your eye. So he was on our radar for a long time, and then he did it the right way and went back to school and tried to finish with national championship, which they did. But then when we start through the draft process, like when we talk through guys, like I wouldn't say it's very rare, but it is kind of rare when you have a unanimous opinion on a receiver. And everybody that read their reports on Emecka, it was unanimous. It was just like, this guy is just a good football player. He understands the game. He knows how to play the position. He knows how to get open. He may not be elite in some areas, athletically, but he's just a really good player. And then, of course, when the coaches get involved, and it was the same thing with them. It was just like, yeah, this guy's kind of a no-brainer. So when you go through the draft process, and when you're picking where we were picking too, it's not like we had a top 5 pick. So to me, like when you get down in the later picks in the first round, you're just looking for quality football players that will fit into your culture and what you're doing. And Emecka was all of that. So, and when you have unanimous between the coaches and the scouting staff, like it's a no-brainer. So it was an easy pick for us.
Yeah, and we hear so much, of course, about his off the field, his mental side, the preparation, the fact that he's never acted or operated like a rookie. It just feels like people can't say enough about the person that is Emecka. Tell us about some of the X's and O's of what makes him so NFL ready at that, and playing that position at such an elite level that it separates him from maybe other wide receivers or other rookies.
Yeah, I mean, I would say the first thing is just his maturity and his decision to go back for next year at Ohio State. If he would have came out the year before, it probably would have been the same, but I think just the mature decision to go back and do that is where you kind of start with. But then he's just a natural, instinctive football player. And not everybody has that. There's a lot of people that are, off the charts athletically that don't have the instincts, they're not as good a player as a guy like Emecka, to me. So he's just, his maturity, his willingness to come in and to learn from Mike and Chris and the good room we've had, and develop the relationship he has with Baker. You don't see that from rookies a lot. And again, I think we kind of knew that coming in, and we knew what we were getting when we drafted him, and then he's almost exceeded expectations.
I know that maybe last night is not the game that Baker would say is his best so far this season, but watching, no matter who has been out there at wide receiver, no matter what injuries have occurred, the fact that to this point Baker was just delivering no matter what, how impressive is that from his angle, and just the way that you hear how important that chemistry is?
Yep.
and it felt like he somehow had chemistry with everybody, no matter who was out there. So how impressive was that, and how do you guys feel like they were able to build that?
Yeah, I mean, Baker Mayfield's a stud. Like, that's what I'll say. I mean, he is the leader of our team. He's been like that since the day he got here. You know, he's endeared himself to everybody on this team, and it's not just the way he carries himself, you know, on the field. Everybody sees the competitive nature. It's the things that he does off the field in the locker room, and I think that's where you kind of develop the chemistry and practice and things like that. And Baker's one of those guys that it doesn't matter who's out there. He's just, you know, he's going to go to work, he's going to practice, and he's going to, you know, prepare regardless of who's playing. So I can't say enough about him and, you know, the job that he's done this year. And, you know, yeah, last night probably wasn't his best night, but that's a tough place to play, and, you know, there's a lot of factors that go into that. But I'm glad he's our quarterback.
Yeah, I am too, and I know everybody in Bucs Nation is, and it's funny because I feel like my algorithm has become a series of videos showing old takes of Baker's done, Baker's washed, that then now and showing how everybody's chanting MVP and things like that. Why do you feel like your scouting staff was able to identify that Baker could work well here?
I mean, I just think that he was the #1 overall pick for a reason, right? Like, it wasn't because he couldn't play this game, and sometimes it just takes a change of scenery and, you know, a certain organization to rally around you to help that. But I don't think it's just the Bucs. I think it's Baker too, and his maturity and just his willingness to do whatever it takes. And it's been a great marriage, right? I mean, we've embraced him, he's embraced the players and the culture that we have here, and he's taken us to, you know, a different level, which is really fun to see.
All right, we're going to take a quick break here on Buccaneers Total Access, brought to you by Advent Health. We'll have more coming up here with Vice President of Player Personnel, Mike Biehl. This is Buccaneers Radio. Welcome back into Buccaneers Total Access, brought to you by Advent Health. We have Vice President of Player Personnel, Mike Biehl, here with us. You know, we talked a little bit about the secondary earlier, but I wanted to dive in a little bit more to these draft picks from this year, Benjamin Morrison and Jacob Parrish. Let's start with Benjamin Morrison. I know it's always tough when a rookie has some injuries early on, of how hard that can be for getting them ingratiated into the team and getting them dialed up to NFL speed. When he has been able to be healthy and active and out there, what are the things that most excite you guys about what he could do for this team?
Yeah, I mean, I just think it's, first of all, you know, we talked about it earlier with his size and length and his athletic ability. Like, he's got a lot of skills that you look for to play the corner position in our league. So that's where it starts. He's another, you know, smart, mature young man that has just been really coachable and learning from the coaches and the guys in that room. And then I do think that injuries factor into that, right? Because I think before his latest injury, he was actually starting to play really good, and he was getting more reps, and you could kind of see him coming on a little bit, and then he has another setback. So it's just one of those things where it's tough, and hopefully we get him healthy, and we're going to need him. I mean, as we've seen with the, you know, the injuries, and we're going to need him at some point in the season. So we're expecting big things from him, not only this season but going forward. I think he's got a chance to be a really good player in this league.
Yeah, and then how about Jacob Parrish? Tell me what you remember about the draft process with him and when he started really standing out.
Yeah, he was one of those guys that was a little bit late to the process because he was an underclassman that not a lot of people were talking about. So he ended up going to the Senior Bowl. So we got that was kind of my first exposure to him. Our scouts, you know, of course, knew about him, but he wasn't getting a lot of buzz like nationally in the media and things like that. So. He did okay in the Senior Bowl, enough to like catch your eye a little bit. But then when I turned on the tape, it was like, holy smokes, this guy is like might be one of the stickiest cover corners that's in the draft. I mean, he's undersized, which, you know, so that, you know, going back to what I said, some teams probably discounted that a little bit, but he's a competitive kid that he's super twitchy. He just understands how to play the position. And again, stepping in and playing nickel in Todd Bowles' defense is not an easy thing, especially as a rookie. And I think he's handled it well. And then, of course, with all the injuries, he had to kick outside and play corner there too. So he's another guy with the versatility, the intelligence. He just kind of puts his head down, goes to work and grinds. And, you know, we're excited about him too and his future.
As we talk about the importance of depth and versatility, I think the offensive line has been a wild thing to watch this year. I can't imagine that you feel like maybe you've even dealt with a situation like this very much before, where it's not just injuries of the next man up, but it's the idea of how much they need to be that cohesive unit, and that you had guys moving all over the place. It wasn't just, oh, this guy's hurt, sub this guy in. It was, oh, move this guy and do that. I mean, it's just a crazy thing to watch, and how they handled it. For you guys, from a scouting standpoint, what was that like to try to help with and build and decide and to create an offensive line that can even try to do something like this?
Yeah, I mean, it started in training camp, right? So it was, from the very beginning of the season, and it probably helped a little bit that it did, because then we were able to try Graham at left tackle, and I mean, a lot of people didn't know that, but I mean, that was going on for weeks behind the scenes. It wasn't just something that we decided the night before the first game we're going to throw Graham at left tackle. So, but it just speaks to the player that he is. He played it in college, so he had experience out there. It wasn't like we were just throwing him in there for the first time. But his ability to do that, and then of course Ben moving into center, like there was a lot of moving parts there, and again, it goes back to the depth, and that room was challenged big time early on. And I think that all the guys that we threw in there like stepped up, and that's something you're always looking for in this league is offensive linemen. It's because they're really hard to find, and I just think that room as a whole and what Carbs and Bakuchi have done, from the coaching standpoint, and it's a really cohesive unit. I think they really enjoy being around each other and playing with each other, and that's a big part of what we do as scouts is try to find guys that are like-minded like that, and I think we've done a really good job of building that room.
We're talking to Vice President of Player Personnel, Mike Biehl. So when I look at a guy like Graham, how does it work evaluating guys when you're thinking about playing them at a position different than the majority of their time in college? It's not that he hadn't played any center. It was just a much more limited part of his college career. How do you guys weigh a player that has been playing center maybe their whole career versus someone like that where you're sort of having to hypothesize what this could look like, and what ends up making you feel comfortable about a guy having to play a different position than what you're used to seeing on tape?
Yeah, and that's the center position is very unique just because it's so hard to play from a physical and mental standpoint. I mean, he's the quarterback of the offensive line. He has to do a lot of things up there from IDing and changing protections and things like that. So that's always a challenge to say somebody who hasn't played it a ton, how is he going to be? And we did have a small sample size of him playing as a freshman. He was probably like 275 pounds then, so it wasn't
just a wee little thing.
It wasn't a true picture of what he really was. But by talking to the coaches and then spending time with Graham, from an intelligence standpoint, we had no questions there. Now it was just a matter of him, putting the ball in his hands and pulling it and seeing if he could snap and do all that stuff. And by the time we ended up selecting him, we had no doubt that he could do that. And then, to me, if you got a guy like that you're projecting to move to center, if he doesn't work out there, we knew Graham Barton was going to be a good player one way or the other, whether he ended up a guard or tackle, like he was going to be a good player. So we just kind of envisioned him from the very beginning, though, of stepping in there at center, and he's done an unbelievable job.
Looking at a couple of the draft picks this year, David Walker and Elijah Roberts. So starting with David Walker, that just broke my heart for him as a human, but then also I just felt like I was hearing a lot of hype about this guy and the role he could play, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on you guys choosing him and what it's like to evaluate someone who maybe had a little bit of the smaller school experience and trying to extrapolate what made you guys so excited about what he could be already as a rookie.
Yeah, well, first of all, it broke my heart too. I mean, as you said, as a person, but also for our team, because I do think that he was going to be a contributing player for us this year. He's one of those guys that, he played at a lower level and had opportunities to go to bigger schools in the NIL era that we are in now. And it's very rare that you don't see guys make that jump, and to me it was almost a testament to him. And like, I was excited that he just said, I'm not going to worry about the money right now. I'm going to go play hard and it's all going to take care of itself. That's pretty rare nowadays too. So that was the first thing. And then, of course, when you turn on the tape, I mean, the guy's just making every play on the field. I mean, he's at a lower level competition. And when you look at those, Division II, Division III guys, like, that's the first thing they have to do. They have to dominate that level. And David, by all means, did that in every way. As a pass rusher, playing the run, they drop him in coverage. Like, he was awesome. And then he gets a chance to go to the Senior Bowl, and it was the exact same thing there. They couldn't block him. So we're excited about David Walker. I mean,
feels like an extra draft pick next year.
That's kind of the way I always look at it, just to look on the bright side and be optimistic. But it stinks for this year, but I think it's going to be fun watching him develop going forward.
And then Elijah Roberts got his first start in the game last night, and because of Kalijah's injury, has definitely had to step up in some different ways. So what have you seen from him and the way he was used in college and the way that you guys were trying to deploy him here?
Yeah, he was the one thing that he could do, or that jumped off the tape in college, was he could rush the passer. So in a D lineman, that's a good place to start, right? For him, it was kind of like, where was he going to fit positionally, because he was a little bit undersized to play, defensive line in our scheme. But he's done a great job of, building up his body, and he's gotten bigger and stronger, and he's able to hold up versus the run now a little better than he did in college, and he still has that pass rush ability. So he was very disruptive last night again. Like it's like one of those things where every game he just kind of sneakily has production, and it may not show up in the stat sheet, but he's getting pressure on the quarterback. He's hustling. He's playing with physicality. Like, he's doing a lot of good things. So, I think we're very optimistic about his future as well.
All right, we're going to take one more break here on Buccaneers Total Access, brought to you by Advent Health. We're talking to Vice President of Player Personnel, Mike Biehl. This is Buccaneers Radio. Welcome back into Buccaneers Total Access, brought to you by Advent Health. We're talking to Vice President of Player Personnel, Mike Biehl. So, looking at kind of the big picture of scouting, and just the strategy that you and Jason Light and the whole staff has clearly been to build through the draft. That's always the goal. How do you guys weigh the idea of draft, free agency, trades, all of those potential ways to build a team, the pros and cons of them, and just even where your team is at any given time? We saw, obviously in the Brady era, it was like, we're going all in, we're doing things a little differently than normal. Forget that cap situation, we'll deal with that later. So how does this work on kind of the pros and cons and the strategy that you guys have for how to handle it?
Yeah, I would say that the easy way to look at it is the draft is always going to be the meat and potatoes. Like, that's where you're going to build the team predominantly, and then you're going to sprinkle in with, quality free agents that you think fit your culture, the Ben Bredesons of the world. Like, Ben's been an unbelievable pickup for us. And then you're always looking at trades, poaching from other practice squads. There's always ways that you can continue to improve the roster, and that's what we do this time of year. It's just constantly churning, and we have an unbelievable pro department that's looking at the whole league and trying to figure out, if there's players that can make us better. So, but if you look at any good team in this league and the teams that win the Super Bowl, predominantly they are built through the draft, and that's always been Jason's philosophy, and it's been my philosophy. And I think we've started with the I am that man stuff, the last 7-8 years. Like, we've really implemented that, and it's, I think it's just taken our drafts to a whole different level.
Yeah, I was going to ask how you guys feel like you have improved as a scouting staff over the years. What are the different areas that, if you were to scout yourselves going back, 8, 9, 10 years, and if you look at now, what are you going to say if you're giving yourself a scouting report are the things that you think you've improved the most in? Yeah,
I would say that right there. Just that, and Jason said this 1,000 times, we very rarely miss on the player, because we all are experts in scouting. Like, we can watch the film and we can determine, if this guy has the ability to play in our league. But we were missing more on the person, you know what I mean? And I think that we just took a step back and we looked at the way we were doing things and the way that we were putting character grades on guys. And it's easy to get blinded by talent in this league. There's a lot of guys that you watch on tape and you just, you get really excited about. And then when you start hearing the character stuff, and it's not great, and he's not a great teammate, he doesn't fit in the locker room very well, he's not very smart. Like, those are the things that you have to keep reminding yourself when you get closer to the draft, not to be blinded by this talent over here. So, and then when you have the talent and you marry it up with the intangibles, that's when you hit home runs. So, I just think that we've done a really good job, and a lot of it's continuity, right? We've had a lot of the same guys, especially with Rob, me, and Spy was here for so long, and Tony Hardy and Shane Scannell, like all those guys, we've all been together for so long that I think that we've just kind of learned as a staff together and done a lot of reflection and self-scouting, and we've improved the process over time.
We're talking to Vice President of Player Personnel, Mike Biehl. How about the way you guys were able to come out of literal cap hell and be competitive the whole time, where I think everyone would have assumed you had to go through some years of just things not being great to get out of that. How do you feel like you guys were able to still build a competitive team throughout that process, where we never, as Jason said, we got to reload instead of rebuild?
Yeah, well, it starts with Baker Mayfield.
Helpful.
If you don't have a quarterback, it's really hard to win this league, and Baker's been awesome ever since we've signed him. So it starts there, but then it also goes back to what we were just talking about with the draft. I think even those years when we were pushing the cap down the road and we were re-signing our own and we were making another run at it with Tom, like, we still were having good drafts. And so we had these young players that were ready to step in, and that's what you have to do. Like, because if you draft really well, you can't pay everybody. It's just the way it is. We're in a salary cap league that, you know, requires you to make some hard decisions sometimes. So there's going to be guys that leave your building that you maybe don't want to, but you also have to have young guys that are going to step in and fill those, you know, positions when they do leave. So I think that's the key, is just to continue to draft well. Those hard decisions are fun to have, right? I mean, that means you're doing something right. So, and I think that we've done a really good job of that. And then, you know, with Greeny and Jackie and Jason, you know, with the cap stuff, they can get creative, and we try to keep as many of these good players as we can, but just continue to draft and have the depth that, you know, if people do leave, that you have people to step in and fill those spots.
Do you think there are certain positions that are harder to draft than others?
I mean, ultimately the quarterback is probably the hardest one, because you have to get that right, you know, and if you look at the history of this league, the first round quarterbacks, the percentage is not great.
Yeah, a little hit or miss?
Yeah, there's a lot of hit and miss in that. So to me, that's the hardest one. And then the rest of them, it's just, you know, and you'll have certain scouts that are better evaluating certain positions, and then, you know, as a staff, once you go through meetings and stuff, you kind of see that.
Maybe assign them that position a little bit more.
Yeah, and we do a little bit of cross-checking, so that will factor into that a little bit. But for the most part, I mean, everybody, they have their own areas, and they're grading every player that's in that area, and we got a good staff.
As you brought up the cross-checking, I know you probably don't have like exact numbers on this, but the idea of how many people have seen a prospect before you draft them, how many hours of tape have been watched, like, give a sense of how much a certain player has been looked at before we pick them.
Well, I would say that the top 4 or 5 rounds, I mean, we probably have 10 reports on those guys between, you know, Jason, myself, Rob, Shane, you know, the area scout, the national scouts, you know, Tony Hardy, our director of college scouting, like, and then you factor in the coaches when they get involved in the process too. So the fun thing for the area scouts and the national scouts is when, you know, you start getting into that 6th, 7th, and then especially as rookie free agents, like, that's kind of where they come into play, because we may not have as many looks at those guys. Or by the time the draft gets here, I'll see most of those guys, but I won't see those guys unless they recommend them or they stand on the table and get excited about them. So the number of hours, the number of miles that our scouts travel is, I mean, it's a lot. I don't have exact numbers. The number of reports that they write every year, it's astonishing, you know, if I did have them, but it's in the thousands. I'll put it that way with the reports. Like, but it's just it's a tough job, and it's a thankless job, the area scouts and the guys that are on the road, but I can't thank them enough, and they're such an integral part to what we do as an organization.
You brought up NIL, and I would love to hear how that has influenced, affected your evaluations of players, the drafting. Like, I think about how it used to be you never knew how a player was going to handle money. Mm-hmm. And I imagine that this in some ways has been helpful, that now you do get a sense of that, but then it does also throw a wrench into all the transferring, all this. I mean, there's just so much that I feel like it's changed. How have you seen this make your jobs harder or easier on evaluation?
I would say that there's 2 things, and you just mentioned the one, that, you know, I think it's actually been a bonus for us to see how guys will react with money in their pocket, because some of these guys are making, you know, $2-3 million.
More than they might.
And even the guys that, you know, that aren't making that are still making, you know, hundreds of thousands. So you do get a sense of that, because we would ask every year, you know, certain players, you go into schools and you'd ask the sources there, you know, what's he going to be like when you put millions of dollars in his pocket? And they'd be like, I don't know. I mean,
nobody can know.
Nobody can know. Like, you know, they have an idea, but like they don't know. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing is just, I think it's affected guys coming out in the draft, right? We were getting to a point there for a while where we were having over 100 underclassmen come out in every draft. And now you get guys that, if they don't feel like they're going to be drafted in like the probably first 4 or 5 rounds, they can go back to college and actually make more money. So I think, and to me, in the long run, that's probably going to make a better product for us. Going back to my example with Emecka, like, his decision to go back to school, now he could have come out and made millions of dollars. It was just more of a personal decision. But I think guys going back to school and maturing and coming out a little bit later than just jumping in the draft after 3 years in college. I think it'll help the product, eventually, especially those later round, free agent type guys. So it'll be interesting to see. I mean, I don't think anybody really knows in this NIL transfer era, because college football is a little bit crazy right now, and it's going to be interesting to see how it's regulated going forward. But as a NFL staff, all we can do is work with what we have, and I think that we do a good job of that.
Yeah, as if there weren't already enough factors you guys were playing with. Now you got even more. Well, Mike, thank you again so much for being with us. We really appreciate you taking the time on a day when I'm sure sleep has been very minimal. We really appreciate it. And that's going to do it for us here on Buccaneers Total Access, brought to you by Advent Health. This is Buccaneers Radio.